Okay, so it looks like most people are pretty well settled in, and I think we can officially start. It's so nice to see everybody. I haven't done this in 2.5 years. Let's see, why are we doing this? Oh yes, that's right. There was this pandemic thing going around, so I'm so happy to see many of us back here, nice and healthy. And so. So this is a program, everybody knows Tom, right? Because Tom's been running some programs here, as I understand it, during Lenten season. And everybody remembers Carol. I wasn't expecting Carol here today, otherwise she would have been up here with me. And it's extra special for me to have Carol here because we're going to talk about St. Teresa of Avila, a Carmelite. Yes, a Carmelite. And we're going to talk a little bit about what does that mean in terms of spirituality, a form of prayer, etc. Does everybody have a handout? Okay, because what I'm going to do is I'd like to ask someone to volunteer to open our session with the opening prayer. These are the words right from one of St. Teresa of Avila's writings. And I thought how wonderful it would be 500 years after St. Teresa of Avila was walking on this earth, that one of you lend your voice to her words. So who would like to do that? Preferably a lady. Who has that wonderful St. Avila? Kathy, please, go right ahead. Nice and loud.
Lord, grant that I may always allow myself to be guided by you, always follow your plans, and purposely accomplish your will. Grant that in all things, great and small, today and all the days of my life, I may do whatever is required.
Amen. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Isn't that a wonderful prayer? You ought to cut this out, put it on when you wake up in the morning, because she's saying every single day, and every single day. And I think that would be a nice way for many of us to start our day in a day of prayer. We start our day with prayer, we end our day with prayer. So it's not unusual for those of you who have attended the sessions that I've run in the past that we have an opening prayer and we also have a closing prayer that are the bookends of our daily lives. So what is this course going to be about? Everybody has the handout. You've seen the announcement, so I'm not going to go and belabor it. But the one point I'd like to make is that me included, we're all on a spiritual journey. If you believe in God, if you believe in Jesus Christ, if you've been baptized, if you haven't been baptized, run, don't slow down. Next door, we'll take care of that. But our life is all about prayer. And St. Teresa of Avila is known as, oh, by the way, I don't think she's related to Father Steve, but I'm sure if we dig into a spiritual family tree, we will find a direct connection over there. So you know, she lived 500 years ago. And 500 years ago, that was during the time period of the Spanish Inquisition, you know, the beginning of the Reformation movement, the reformation of some of the spiritual practices in those days, the Carmelites and the Discalced Carmelites, and we had the Ignatians, etc. So we had a lot of energy in Christian Catholicism. And, you know, placed on top of that was the whole Protestant movement, and then the Council of Trent, and then the Counter-Reformation. A lot of action going on in those days. But Teresa of Avila, the reason she is a doctor of the church, and she's really the first female doctor of the church, 1970, simultaneously she and St. Catherine of Siena were named doctors of the church, primarily for reasons because of prayer. You know, let me just back up a little bit because I wanted to first speak before I am sort of jumping ahead of myself a little bit. What are you gonna learn out of this series of lectures and classes? What is the objective? Why did when I was speaking with Tom, why did we say, I think this is a good one to do? You know, normally we've done stuff on scriptures. But when you look at, well, who are the people in the history of the Catholic Church? Now, I'm specifically Catholic Church, not Christianity. Who are the key people throughout the 2,000 years that have really embodied the voice, the message, the understanding of the scriptures into writings for their contemporaries, but not only their contemporaries, but all the way up to us? Who are those people? Those are the declared doctors of the church. So we have St. Augustine, we have St. Thomas Aquinas, all the top names that you know. And it wasn't until 1970 that maybe someone said, I don't see any women on this list. And so St. Teresa of Avila was the first one, and right away, St. Catherine of Siena, and then two others. We have St. Teresa of Lisieux, the little flower, and then also Hildegard of Bingen. And maybe someday we should just do a couple of sessions on just the women doctors of the church. Because, you know, women have a kind of a different touchy-feely perspective of the scriptures and what does it mean. And the important part of being named a doctor of the church is that the selection committee, if you want to call it that, approved by the Pope, is that what they are saying is truth, foundation in the scriptures. So it isn't so like someone's come up with some new ideas. And you'll see why St. Teresa of Avila starts with the scriptures and then develops her theory or her prayer practice on our spiritual lives. So I'm on that spiritual journey because I'm not a Carmelite and I want to know. You know, you ever see that? I need to know. And the Carmelite spirituality, to me at least, is so important with regard to prayer, especially contemplative prayer. And we'll talk a little bit about, well, I mean, are there different ways to pray? Oh, absolutely. And I know for a fact that once you're done on August 11th, you're going to go home and you're going to say, I now pray differently. That's my objective for you guys, is to understand what Teresa of Avila has written in her book, The Interior Castle. And if you wanted to read her earlier book, The Way of Perfection, that's also a very good one to read. But she really says, this is the way to pray. And she was a mystic, okay? And just to tell you a little bit more, like, what's this word mystic? You know, this word mystic associated with mysticism, it sounds, I don't know, what would people say these days? It sounds really new agey stuff. No, it isn't. Mystic comes from the word mysterious. And we use that term in the consecration of the host, you know, the mysterious body and blood, the transformation. There are many things in our tradition and in our belief and in our faith which are in the category of mysterious. We don't accept it on blind faith. We use our mind and we say, I don't fully understand it. This is outside the realm of what you would call the fleshy world, the world we live in, as St. Paul would describe. So there are some things that in our faith we say, I believe in that. It's a mystery. I can't explain it. No one else can explain it to me. However, those who are in the category of mystics, of which, you know, that would be another great course to have, the mystics of the Catholic Church. The thing that makes them a mystic is, Padre Pio's in that category, is that they are having these experiences, almost like an out-of-body experience. These are true experiences that they're having. With St. Teresa of Avila, they were talking about, you know, she was in this ecstasy, moments of ecstasy. Not only are these mystics having these experiences, they're able to articulate what it was like, what it is that they were experiencing. Whereas the rest of us, we might say, oh, I had a mystical experience. True, I was walking in the woods and suddenly I felt oneness with God. That's a mystical experience. We've had those moments. But if you were to ask, to say, could you describe this? You're going to struggle with that. This is why I think the Holy Spirit has given us special saints who are in that category of mystics, the theology of mystics. So the objectives here, I want to make sure people understand what is meant by contemplative prayer. We'll talk a little bit about Vatican II, because many of us, myself included, grew up on the Baltimore Catechism. But the Catechism of the Catholic Church added a whole section in there about the nature of prayer. And we'll talk about that and why contemplative prayer is not something that you've encountered in general. We've encountered the other forms of prayer. You know, the spiritual journey, I'm a spiritual director. So people that I work with ask me often, so Mike, am I on the right path? And I don't tell them what path to be on, but I ask them, how intimate are you with God? Show me how intimate, show me how you pray, and I'll show you how intimate you are with God. Because when we went through first grade, second grade, etc., you know, we learned how to pray the Our Father, the Hail Mary, the Glory be to the Father, the Rosaries, you know, all of these vocal prayers. But really, as we get older, we should be holding on to that, but we should be moving past that. And we should be in the realm of both meditative prayer and contemplative prayer, both of which are different. and both of which I think are very important in our spiritual life. Okay, and then we're also going to be introduced to various spiritualities. And what I mean by that is that it's very interesting. I looked up the number one time, I forgot. I don't know if you know, Tom, how many different orders of priests and nuns are there? You know, Carmelites, Ignatians, there's a whole host of them. Each one of them has a spirituality. And every time someone like, say, Ignatius of Loyola came up with this sort of a concept, essentially they went to the Pope and said, could we start a new order? And we have a lot of followers. And no kidding, when it came time for, I think, the Poor Clares, the founder of the Poor Clares went to the Pope and he said, join some other order. We got too many orders already. But, you know, God doesn't fit in a little small box. And so you can almost understand the nature of the different spiritualities. And we'll speak specifically about Carmelites. If you're back, Carol, at some point on a Thursday, it's Thursdays, Carol, so come back and you can tell us about the Carmelite spirituality. But we also plan to have Tom's mother, who is also third order Carmelite. Yeah? Great. So we could do that. Okay, the resources we'll use, everybody has the list. Tom has put a web page up. Did everybody see the web page? Everything you need is there. You don't have to buy anything. This is great. How often is the audio book there? The written book is there. There is one book I really like by Ruth Burroughs. If anybody wanted to thumb through this, Ruth Burroughs is I think she's still alive in her 90s, actually. She's a best-selling author. She's written so many books. She gets it. And what better person to understand St. Teresa of Avila than someone who's in that same motherhood. Okay, so let me move along over here. We talked a little bit about Teresa of Avila. 1515, she was born. You know, from what I've read, typical teenage girl. You know, flirting, dancing, hanging around boys, and strict father. Sadly, her mom dies at age 14. She goes wild. Her father, at age 16, says, "Oh, I can't handle this chick. We got to put her in the convent somewhere. They'll take care of her." So she goes to the convent, and it's like, hey, I kind of like this convent. I'm away from dad, right? This is kind of a loosey-goosey place to live. I mean, this is what I think early on made her think about, I think as I get older, I would change things here. Because in those days, there was a lot of, let's call it loosey-goosiness among many of the orders. Many of them ended up getting reformed because it was almost like country club stuff. I'm kind of exaggerating a little bit, but they went through, let's reform and let's go back to our original roots and discipline. So by the time she's 19, it's ready for her to come out. She says to dad, "No, I'm staying. I'm not getting married. No way, Jose.com." Just to put a little emphasis on there. So there she is. And remarkable woman. Like, she was very charismatic from what I read. She was very influential. She spoke with authority. St. John of the Cross, who's someone that I studied quite a bit in grad school, was her spiritual director. Can you imagine having St. John of the Cross as your spiritual director? Holy moly, right? And he was in his 20s when she was already in her 50s. So there was like a twice age difference. And she knew that as a woman, she would, even though she was very influential, she would have struggled trying to reform, trying to change things. So she asked St. John of the Cross, "Can you help me out?" And he did. He got imprisoned by his own order, and he was like almost dead. He died at 49, she died at 67. So, he lost a lot of years. But both of them together are considered the great mystics of the 16th century, mid-1500s. He's a doctor of the church also. And but she was canonized very quickly, 40 years after. St. John of the Cross took a lot longer, but they shared, and they were what you would call right at the edge of being persecuted. Less so St. Teresa of Avila, but this was during the Spanish Inquisition. In fact, so much so on St. John of the Cross's deathbed, he asked one of his closest brothers in the monastery, in front of him, please burn all his letters and his writings. We only have 6 poems by St. John of the Cross, the greatest Spanish poet in secular terms, burning his work because he was worried about his legacy after in terms of how he might be misinterpreted. Sad that we have lost those writings. Okay, so just to give you an idea, in terms of the doctors of the church, the shortest time from a time person died until they were declared a doctor of the church was St. Alphonsus of Liguori, 84 years. So this isn't something that happens very quickly. Those writings are examined and examined and examined. The longest one was Irenaeus, 1,800 years from the time he died until he was declared a doctor of the church. So 1970 was when St. Teresa of Avila, based on her writings, 4 books, not extensive, but these were books. So why did she write these books? It's interesting when you read the story. It's because she was the mother of her convent, the nuns, and the priest, she was asked, could you write and teach your nuns how to pray? It was almost as if, I'm too busy. Your nuns are simple people. They're women. Seriously. They're too simple. We can't explain to them how to pray, so why don't you write and tell them how to pray? Now, the irony is that there's no book that any of those male priests wrote in those days that have survived to the level of what St. Teresa of Avila wrote. And she was already at that age, sick. She died at 67, so she was tired. She started 14 convents. She was very, very active. And in those final years, for her to write. Now, interestingly enough, when you read her writing, so those of you who read the first chapter or the preface, you recognize that she's rather self-deprecating. Oh, I don't know why I'm doing this. I'm such a sinner. And so she recognized herself as a sinner, and I think was able to place herself at the level of, okay, for those of us, most of us, who are in the sinner, living outside the great mansions, the castle, how do you get in there? What do you got to do? And so she is known of making what almost like a practical guide. And this is like probably the 10th time I mentioned the word journey, but when you look back in history, every great religion, or most religions, have as a descriptor, is a journey of some sort. So you look back, early writings prior to even Genesis, the Epic of Gilgamesh, that some of you may have heard of. And then you have, the journey of Abraham and Sarah, their particular journey. You have the search for the Holy Grail. You have Dante's Inferno. All of those represent in our mortal life some kind of pathway to reach spirituality. So we as Catholic Christians have as a guide St. Teresa of Avila, and in particular this book. And it starts off, right from the beginning. It's clear that, her metaphor of, and that she said she had received as an enlightenment from God, her metaphor of, our soul is like this huge castle made out of a diamond, and it's got these 6 chambers. She calls each one of them a mansion. But think of them as 6 rooms, 6 chambers. And at the very, very center of your soul, we talk about the indwelling spirit. Okay, some people don't like to think that God is actually in us, but we are taught we have the indwelling spirit, and we live very much, as St. Paul said, we live in the flesh. Now, he's not meaning fleshy flesh like sexy flesh. We're living in the material world, but really we're called to be living in the walk in the spirit. There are other metaphors, like we say we have a false self to us, but the true self is within us. And in order to become totally the true self, we have to shed that false self. And so understanding, this is why St. Teresa of Avila in the first chapter, she talks about know thyself. Because if you know yourself, you realize perhaps how grand and glorious God is. And then we'd be able to humble ourselves, because humility is what's necessary to begin this journey of prayer. And so here we have this nice metaphor. In the center is Jesus. We're trying to reach him. And he's at the center as a bright light. But if you're outside the castle, you may not even notice that there's a light glowing over there. But as you get closer, as Father Blaise will say, past the moat, around there, and you get closer, through prayer, you'll be able to get into that first door. So she uses that metaphor of, from Jesus in the center comes the light. Follow the light. Have you heard that before? Follow the light. I'm sure there's some movie that's, cartoony that says follow the light. I like to think of it as magnetism. You ever, as a kid, take 2 magnets, you put them far apart, you don't feel anything. Oh, there's an attraction there because it goes, from infinity. But the closer you get the 2 magnets together, the stronger the pull is. I think that's the way it is with us and with God. if we're going on the right path, you'll know because you will be pulled further. And when that pull sort of stops, as it was with St. Teresa of Calcutta, she was in that dark night for a couple of decades. It's not because God has abandoned you, but he's moved me a little further away so that you can say, I'm coming to you. I'm coming to you. That means while we're alive on this earth, we continue moving in that direction for the spiritual journey. So I want to read this one sentence I found this morning by Cardinal Christoph Schönborn when he was trying to explain, what's this contemplative stuff? What does that mean that our goal in our spiritual life is to have union with God? He says, quote, I love this, the interior intimacy with God, which is intended for all baptized people, to which Jesus wants to lead all of his disciples, because it is his own intimacy with the Father. My favorite gospel is John. It is filled with mysticism. Jesus is recorded, his words are recorded as he prays to the Father. And he says to his Father, as you and I are one, I hope to be one with my disciples, so that through this oneness, they may be one with you. This oneness permeates the Gospel of John. And I think that is sort of foundational, that sometimes we forget. This is why our prayer should be one of intimacy and contemplative, and maybe less so on vocal prayer. Like if Tony was to tell Carol how much he loved her, he takes out the book of love poems and he's like reading these love poems, and Carol's going, "That's someone else's words. What are your words?" Well, then he's, starts stumbling a little bit. But how much better is it then to just sit with your beloved, quiet, holding hands? No words. No words are necessary. And that is, I think, the way it is we eventually have to become in this life with Jesus, so that we have that level of intimacy. So I'm just going to add one more word here that I thought was important. It's in that first paragraph under overview of chapter 1. We give our attention to God through our prayer, whether it be vocal or mental. Prayer must involve the mind. Simply reciting words without thought is not prayer. This is one of the criticisms that Martin Luther gave of Catholics in those days. So he was looking for, how can we get them? And he goes, they're all saying the rosary. But I bet you after the third Hail Mary, they're not even thinking about what they're saying. Their minds are on the shopping list, or, where they're going to go for the movies that night. And so you can be vocal prayer as long as you're mindful and present. It involves the mind. And contemplative prayer, as we will learn in the Catechism of the Catholic Church, the key word for contemplative prayer is silence. So you can sit there, just like the example I gave. You're with your beloved. You don't need words. You just need to give full attention. It's like the story of Martha and Mary. Martha's running around trying to get the kitchen ready because Jesus showed up with 12 disciples and probably 3 other ladies. And, she's running around trying to get, and Mary is sitting at the feet. And she is just being present with Jesus. And Martha complains, of course, because, she wants to be of the active mind. So we want to behave like Mary in a Martha world. We live in a Martha world. Busy, busy, busy. Something's always, cell phones are ringing, okay? But we need those moments of silence. And you don't need words. Jesus already knows what's in your heart. He just wants you to say, I set aside that. Okay, one more thing, and then we'll really get onto the movie over here. So you'll hear Father Blaise talk about lights on. Teresa of Avila was lights on. And I think he was using the metaphor again about Jesus is at the center. And she's aware of it. Her lights are on. I think we might use more like awake. Very often in the Gospels, you'll hear the metaphor of your sleep. And what does Jesus mean like when you're asleep? Well, you're not aware of, he's not the priority. When you are awake, then you are living in the moment. You're living and you're being very, very high in awareness. And the difference, as I said earlier, with people like Teresa of Avila and St. Catherine of Siena is that not only are they awake, but they're able to articulate what does that awakeness mean, because they are awake a lot of the time. Okay, Let me see if I had anything else on my notes. You can see, I read my own notes. I thought I didn't want to keep writing and writing, otherwise, everybody's handout would be like 50 pages long, and so we're going to do that. So let me ask: does anybody have any questions before we watch this first film clip? Like, why are you here? It's not for the free donuts and coffee. I know that, but why are you here? Yeah, Diane. Noisy world we live in, isn't it, Diane? Yeah, yeah. You want to find? Yeah, Carol.
When she starts to talk about entering, and I think she uses like a gate or something like that, and she talks about the um, animals that are there.
Oh yeah, the reptiles, the alligators. Yeah.
I know that's danger, but is there another meaning that I'm not getting?
Yeah, I think so. So I thought it was interesting because Father Blaise talks about the alligators. I don't think there was any alligators in Spain in the 1500s. I'm not sure they knew about alligators, but reptilian existence. All right, kind of thinking of the serpent in the Garden of Eden. I think that's sort of awareness of the distractions that occur to us because of Satan planting thoughts and ideas. Maybe you don't want to go in that castle. It's nice out here. Go find a shady spot. And she even says that even when you're inside the castle, going from room to room, Satan's in all those rooms. So our spiritual journey, we keep encountering, and this is why discernment is such a good practice for us as Christians, because is this of God or is this of Satan? And many of Padre Pio, read his writings. He practically, you kind of can walk away with the idea that Satan was living in the same little cell that he was in. And he does, because that cell is here. And it's our need to sort of get away. So I think her metaphor really is that before you even enter that first chamber, you've been living in this world. As Diane says, it's noisy and it's filled with distractions and temptations. Distractions and temptations are very, very similar. This is why mastering or practicing contemplative prayer, the prayer of silence, the prayer of quiet, as she says, allows us to say, some people criticize it. Well, what if God's trying to talk to you? What if you're just trying to be so quiet, you're sealing it off? Well, don't worry. I think God has a direct line. But it's Satan that's got to work through something else. And if you can maintain and avoiding those distractions, then you're able to then focus more on your relationship with Jesus. Does that answer your question, Carol?
Yeah, yes.
Right. Satan is throughout. Any idea why 7 rooms, 7 chambers? I don't know the answer to this, but I was thinking about this morning. It's a Bible number. It's a magic number. What when you think of, and it was 7 days, huh? Creation. Yeah. And what happened on the 7th day? He rested. And when you reach the 7th mansion, a rest. It's like St. Augustine said, "My heart is restless until it rests with you, O Lord." Well, what better number to have than 7? And I think that's, pardon me?
Gifts of the Holy Spirit.
Gifts of the Holy Spirit, yeah. The 7 deadly sins. 7 is a very important number, as you said. You had 7 children?
That's why I couldn't get the same shoes for 40 years.
Janice, who else has 7 children here? Busy, huh?
One of 7.
You're one of 7. There you go. Yeah.
Cast out 7 demons.
Cast out 7 demons. Yeah, that's right. I read this morning, and I was reading about St. Catherine of Siena because I didn't know much about her life. She was one of 25. Her mom was very busy. Right. Yeah. So, not recommending it, but if it happens, it happens. Okay. Any other questions before we start? because we'll have plenty of time for the discussion. Okay, so this has all been set up so that all I got to do is push the button. And I think if there's someone that has light switches, maybe we could shut those off. The volume, I think, is going to be okay.